Well, here we are at the Wood Technology Center for another segment in our series. Dave, good to see you again.
Thanks, Jim.
And we've got our good friend Nick from Milwaukee Tool here today to talk about our cordless framing nail you got with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take her away.
So this is our 21 degree Milwaukee M18 FUEL framing nailer. One of the big differences, you'll obviously see no hose or any compressor anywhere near me, right?
Yeah.
The big, advantage to using a cordless beyond a pneumatic is obviously less parts, right? So you don't have to drag a big compressor around with you. You don't have to get a big 50-foot hose to run from your compressor, if you're up on scaffolding, something like that.
Yeah.
When we look at cordless advantages, obviously, people wonder, what's the power like in comparison to pneumatic? This has all of the power, if not a little bit more than your pneumatic nailers are gonna have. This has the power to sink 3.5-inch full round head nails through solid oak, which, is one of the most dense wood materials that we have. So we're gonna go over just a brief overview of kind of the key features of this tool. And then, let's sink some nails. Right?
Okay.
So you'll notice first and foremost, obviously we're all wearing glasses. Safety is absolutely essential when dealing with, any type of nail gun, whether it's a framer all the way down to a brad nailer or a pin nailer. Obviously this is gonna be shooting a nail out of the top here at a very aggressive speed. You'll notice right now I don't have the battery in. That is obviously for a reason. Our cartridge here is not loaded with any nails, so we're all safe right now.
Yep.
We'll go over in a second how to load the nails into the actual cartridge right here, but just kind of a brief walk around of the tool. Up here we have the ejection point where the nail is actually gonna come out of the tool. So you see right there, that's our ejection point. And you'll notice there's kind of a little give right here. That's gonna be our actuator. That's gonna actually project the nail out depending on which mode we're in. And now I say which mode we're in because this has two different modes. So if you guys kind of look at the back here, you'll notice we have our power button. Right now, obviously no battery, we're not gonna have any power. But when we click on the mode button here, it's gonna change from the 3-nail icon to the 1 nail icon.
Yep.
The 1 nail icon is what's called sequential, which means the actuator has to be pressed in before you can squeeze the trigger to fire the nail. If we're on the bump feed method right here, the 3-nail, that's gonna mean we are pushing this piece of actuator into the nail, and then we can pull the trigger, then we can hold the trigger, and then just keep bumping it all the way down.
And what the industry calls bounce nailing, which is what this is. Journal of Light Construction did a test with 2 tract homes, and overall it saved 4 hours.
Yeah.
In other words, it's also one of the reasons why most people get in huge amounts of trouble is having it on bounce nail all the time. Because if you strike anything with the actuator, we call it the push lever, then it goes off. Yeah. And it's one thing we teach the students. If you have a chance to do it with just a sequential trip or a single hit, that's probably the best and safest way.
Gotcha.
Again, safety being the most paramount with, nail guns. It's going to project your nail at high velocities, right? And that's what can cause major injuries. So we always want to make sure we're wearing eye protection. But we do add a couple of key features that are going to be, user demanded features like a belt clip, so that if I'm, again, up on scaffolding, I can simply throw it into my belt right here. We also add a rafter hook. So if I don't have a belt clip, I can just throw this on a rafter and the tool will just hang out up there. Again, the point is to save time on the job site. I'm not having to go down and wait for the compressor to kind of get to the PSI levels that I need. It's gonna project that nail at the same PSI level every single time. And that's what's most important to our end users is the consistency, nail after nail. Is it gonna sink to the exact level that I need it to? Speaking of which, up top here, you'll notice we have this little twistable dial. This is how we're gonna adjust the depth gauge. You'll see there's just a little icon right here that shows exactly how far our nail is going to sink into the piece of wood. So we can adjust that all the way out or all the way in like this. Or if we spin it a couple of times, now you can see it's gonna stick all the way into the wood and it's actually gonna become what's called sub-flush.
And Nick, this is really important. So if you're framing in nothing but fir's pretty hard. Hemlock, of course, is soft. So to be able to have that depth setting nose is really, really important. Otherwise, you're having back to the compressor and change the compressor's pressure to increase it to go through some harder material. And if you leave the nail proud, then you got to get your hammer out, drive it the rest of the way.
I'm glad you covered that, yeah, because that's all news to me. So if you're working with a compressor and you've got your gun just set up however you want it. But does the pressure in the compressor
See, this is a
fluctuate
real
between
issue.
cycles?
Yeah,
And all of a sudden you get the nails proud and you have to go back and finish them off?
So you've heard on a site, the compressor goes on, brrr, okay, and the pressure is building up. Now, pop, 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 pop. Brrr. So you're going up and down in the pressure. The other great thing, Jim, is if you have a pneumatic gun that's driven by a compressor, what's coming down the line is not just air. It's oil, it's water, and it's rust from the tank. So it increases the level of maintenance for some of these tools. With this one, of course, there's no oil, water, or rust because there's nothing coming down the line. In fact, Nick, what do you need to do for maintenance on this?
Yeah, so one of the biggest, issues that users face out in the field is jammed nails, right? So we actually have an onboard hex key right here that you can just slide in and out of its casing, which is going to allow you to screw and unscrew this hex bolt right here so that you can take out this piece and it will actually pop up and you can get your jam out of those nails.
And a lot of times you'll find that happens because you have an accidental nail strike. There'll be a nail there, you hit the nail, and it will bend the nail trying to get out of the gun, and it will jam within the nose. So being able to change that out really quickly is important.
Yeah, super important. And again, it's tool free. All you need is this little hex key, and it just slides right into your storage compartment right there. So talking about loading the actual nails now, we have our magazine right here, right? We also sell an extended magazine, so you could put, I believe, up to 40 different nails on there as well. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our set of nails, and I have here our kind of standard 3 1/4 nails. This gun in particular is gonna take all the way from a 3 1/2 nail, all the way down, and if you forget, it has a little indicator right there as well, all the way down to a 2-inch nail. Okay. So 2 inches to 3 1/2, I have 3 1/4 right here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna slide it into the end of our magazine, kind of pull that flush. And right now, if I wanted to take the nails out, I could. I have a little squeeze lever right here. I'm gonna squeeze that, pull that all the way down, release the lever, and let it snap forward. And now we're loaded and ready to go. If you look, and again, I don't have a battery, so it's not gonna fire. If you look, it's loaded right in that, right in the ejector spot that I showed you guys earlier.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So now it's ready to go. All we need is the battery. But that's kind of how we would, standardize loading, whether it's a 2-inch all the way to a 3 1/4 inch nail, and even 3 1/2.
Nick, what is driving it down? Is there a motor that drives it down, drives the nail out?
Yeah, so I mean, if you really wanted to get technical with it, you could always take a look at the operator manual and see the exact piece that's driving it in. Okay. We have I guess you'd call it kind of like a pistol or a piston in there that would actually push and drive that nail out. Again, with the power to sink, this size nail into a full sheet of oak as well. So again, it's got the power, it's got the pop, which is super important, obviously, for a variety of different applications. You've got your tool-free depth adjustment, all the way from just a little out of the, I would say probably no more than an 1/8 inch popped out of their surface. Or you could do a sub flush if you needed to, go over the nail with, an additional putty and kind of smooth it out, make it look like there was no nails actually there.
And Jim, this is really important because without actual compressed air, you don't have the exhaust. Because normally that piston would get driven down and the exhaust has to go somewhere.
Right.
And a lot of times if you're in a dusty environment, which is pretty much any construction site you're at, it comes back at you. Mm-hmm. So being able to turn that exhaust is important. But with a battery operated machine, there's no need for an exhaust.
Well, as you fellas are talking, I'm sitting here thinking, on the corded stuff with compressors, I'm guessing if I'm doing this all year round and my paycheck is tied to how much work I'm getting done, I'm probably cranking the pressure up, overdriving nails, so I'm never having something proud, which, as we know, you go to the APA, you overdrive, all of a sudden it's a whole different game, when it comes to shear or hurricane winds or whatever. So this type of tool seems like it's...
Wait till you get the inspector on site.
Yeah.
And if the inspector looks at it and says, Yeah.
And being a framing nailer product, I'm assuming that relates to a specific diameter of the fastener.
Yeah.
And whereas a finish nailer, some of the other kinds of nailer, coil nailers, they might be different diameters or different materials.
Yeah.
Is that true?
So this one takes .113
or something,
and to a .148 diameter nail. And again, these are full round head as opposed to kind of the half heads that you might see as well on job sites. So we're loaded in our magazine right now. Again, you could fit, I believe, probably about 25 nails, no question, all the way to our extended one, which would probably be closer to 75.
Okay.
We can, load this up and kind of fire it away.
So in other words, what you're saying is I can change out the magazine
Yep.
and make a longer magazine on the same tool?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, so it's got a little screw in here. Again, uses the same hex key that we have. You can actually unscrew this magazine all the way, pop in your extended magazine. That's going to, again, allow the user to not have to go back and get more nails in their cartridge, go back downstairs, and just decreases downtime on the job site, which at the end of the day, efficiency is key when you're doing, large jobs, especially like framing, and you need a high amount of nails.
And Nick, I'm going to ask you one more time on the warranty and everything. Is this the same 5 and 3 on the batteries?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's the Milwaukee guarantee. So we have the 5-year on the tool, the 3-year on the lithium ion batteries. Again, if you're going to use the 2 amp hour battery or the 1.5, it's only a 2-year warranty. But for something that's going to use a significant amount of ampage like this tool is, we're going to want to err on the side of a 5 or maybe even a little bit higher.
Okay. Interesting. Dave, I know you go over these types of products in your core class. Any other things you want to add or things you might cover with your students?
Well, mostly about pneumatics, related to compressors. The big thing obviously is not to put any body part under it, but you can also do this. Like a lot of times you'll find someone nailing a frame together and they'll put their foot here and drive it home. And we absolutely say no way on that one. In fact, that actually, believe it or not, a lot of carpenters have steel shanks for that one reason, because they'll step on it and they figure the steel shank is going to protect them, but it's not very protective.
Gotcha. So do you want to be our guinea pig here? So again, I'm going to be very careful not to point towards anyone. Here we're going to have our power mode. So I'm just going to hold that down in a sec. And you'll see my sequential trigger.
Yep.
If I hold down our mode, we're going to switch over to bump feed here, right? So we'll go back to sequential just so that it's a little bit easier. And again, we're going to want to engage the actuator and then pull the trigger.
It's heavy, but it's got a good balance.
Ergonomics is huge.
It's huge.
Right? It's huge.
Now, just to show you that when I pull the trigger, nothing happens, because the actuator has got to be down before it'll fire. Okay? And then again, if you set it to bump,
just hold it down for half a second.
Hold it down for half a second.
There you go.
Okay? Then you can hold the trigger like that down. Okay? And I probably am not using it right yet, but
no, you're good.
So
let's try to change the depth.
So I think so back it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's try going down deeper.
Yeah.
This way.
Let's sub flush it.
Good. Okay. So that's
a nice
it.
flush now.
Now at this point, I should be able to go back, change the mode, hold the tool trigger down. Okay. So I still have to go down farther still.
Yeah, just all the way down to the end there.
Okay.
Perfect.
This would just take a little bit to get used to.
Yeah, so, it's a new technology to the market, cordless
The
nailers.
recovery is pretty good.
It's very quick.
So normally with bounce nailing, of course, with tools of this ilk that are battery driven, there's a recovery between fires, but this recovery is pretty quick. I still, though, recommend to everyone, and this is the way I use it, which is a single trip. Okay, just a better setup, because this way, no matter what, I can't accidentally pull the trigger, hit something, and have more nails fire.
Yeah.
This is, and I know it's going to sound funny, but on job sites and everything else, you think, okay, you're the one that's going to get hurt. That's not the way it works. Many of the injuries are for people that aren't even using the nail gun.
I believe that.
Yeah. So because these things will have a tendency to skip. And sometimes you're a perfect user doing everything right. But as the nail goes in, it hits something of a differing density or another nail, and it will bounce back out. So it's where your Kevlar underwear comes in.
So yeah, that's the Milwaukee M18 21 degree framing nailer right there.
Well, Nick, today you brought the framing nailer with us. I'm assuming you have other categories that you offer as well in the FUEL series?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So within our cordless nailers, obviously we kind of have the larger nails like framing nailers that would be used for more of those rough in type applications. But the higher gauge you get in nails, the smaller your nail is going to get. So we go from kind of framing nailers as the biggest type of nailer. This one's a 21 degree. We also sell a 30 to 34 degree model, which is more commonly used on the East Coast, actually. It's kind of varied on regions. So over here on the West Coast, kind of in the Northwest, we go with the 21 degree. This is going to be our most popular framing nailer. We also have an 18 gauge brad nailer in our M18 FUEL series. We have a 15 gauge finish nailer, as well as a 15 gauge stapler as well. And then you kind of get into the smaller nails as well, right? So we have actually 12 volt in our M12 line. We have a M12 pin nailer. So just the smallest little nail you've ever seen in your life.
Nick, you mentioned a finish nailer versus a brad nailer. I'm just unclear on what those differences are. Dave, could you touch base on that?
Sure. We have some samples here and I'll bring them up. But basically, these larger nails, even then they're measured in diameter, which is a smart way to do it. We in the States do really incredibly. We go back to Anglo-Saxon days. So you sell an 8-penny nail, you sell a 16-penny nail, ones that you would hammer in with a hammer. It's a dumb way of doing it. In Europe, they don't. They go by the diameter in millimeters by the length, and that makes a lot more sense. Now, what happens when you've got machine nails, they have to be delivered down a magazine and everything, and when they get really small, they measure them in wire gauge. So you'll have a 16 gauge, 18 gauge, 15 gauge are pretty common. And then because it's bass-ackwards, the larger the number, the smaller the diameter. So for instance, these are pretty standard, Jim. And you can see these collations. Collation just means gathering stuff together, okay? And these are different for electroplate or for galvanized, okay? Or when you start to get to finish nails. And these are 15 gauge finish nails, all right? They're still pretty small, and you would use that for trim. Now, if you want to go smaller, because you don't need the length of the nail, and you don't need the diameter, and for appearance, you don't want to make them as visible, then you would start to go to either an angled or a straight collation, but you would go to brad nails. And most brad nailers are around 18 gauge, all right? And of course, you can see that there's others here. Nick, I'm looking at a wire collation here. Do you also have a wire nailer as well?
We do. It is a pneumatic, so not corded or cordless quite yet, but it is a 15-degree coil roofing nailer.
15-degree coil roofing nailer. Okay, that's great. Yeah. Great to know. If I may, could I have yours here for a second? We talked about the length of the magazine and also the angle. Now, the idea is if you have an angled magazine, you can get into a corner. And the steeper the angle, the easier the corner. Now, roofers, instead of having a straight collation, they actually have a coil. And the coil makes the gun very squat and very nimble. You can get into a lot of different places. Yeah. Now, obviously, for finish work, you wouldn't want that. Thank you. And for the very smallest among us, you can see I have a thing that actually shows what the head of the nail looks like when it goes in. And this is a 23 gauge, we call it a pinner. And the nails are so incredibly small, they actually have an arrow on them to tell you which direction to drive the nail and which direction to load it. But a FUEL 23 gauge pinner would be wonderful. Now, they don't hold very much. Usually lay down a little bit of glue, but if you're making mantles or putting up detail molding or something, they just don't show any hole at all. And I have those here. There's a 10 penny, a 15 gauge, an 18 gauge, and a 23 gauge.
So would the typical brad nailer allow you to drive both an angled clip and a straight clip? Or are those two separate tools?
Most brad nailers are straight collation, okay? And because you don't need to really get into small spaces, it's a pretty small gun. But on the other hand, and the same too with the pinners, the 23 gauge pinners, they're usually a straight collation or a straight set of nails. But the angle collation, that would be for a longer magazine like the old Senko finish guns and that sort of thing. And the angle collation will get you, or the angle magazine will get you into corners that you would not be able to get into.
So that would be a different tool typically.
A different tool,
Gotcha.
Yeah. I've never seen one that goes from an angle collation to straight.
Makes sense.
Maybe in the future.
Maybe.
Well, gentlemen, thanks for a great session. This was well worth it. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nick, thanks for bringing the fuel.
Thanks for having me, guys.